Welcome to The Point. This is Raj Bhattacharya, your moderator. Today, we focus on the most important movement that we have seen in decades, Black Lives Matter, and why is it important to South Asians. As a note to the audience, please submit your questions on Facebook Live or YouTube Live. Panelists are providing their views as individuals and not speaking on behalf of their associated organization or institution. My apologies to the YouTube listeners. We had to restart given we could not start on the Facebook Live properly. Let me introduce the panel here. We have Dr. Bedabrata Pain. After 15 years of being an award-winning senior research scientist at NASA and Caltech, Dr. Pain quit NASA to follow his passion, filmmaking. And with his debut film Chittagong, in 2013, he won 4 Indian National Awards, including the prestigious Golden Lotus as the best film and the best debut director, as well as awards in several international film festivals. One of the inventors of CMOS digital image sensor technology that enabled the digital camera revolution from cell phones to movie cameras, Dr. Pain holds over 90 patents and is an inductee to the US Space Technology Hall of Fame. He received his B.Tech degree from IIT Kharagpur in 1986 and MS and Ph.D. from Columbia University. He has a keen interest in history, politics, philosophy, and quantum physics. And if that's not enough, he is currently working on a number of feature films and web series. Welcome, Dr. Pain. We have Chandri Lahiri. Chandri is GIS specialist by training and works in environmental management for state of Massachusetts. Chandri is born in Kolkata. By the time she was 17, she lived in 7 cities in 3 countries, making "where are you from" a tricky question to answer. She dabbles in writing, children's literature, blogging, and short fiction, and has also taken to the stage a few times to tell the true stories, most recently in the show Stories from the Stage by PBS. She believes there is hope in incremental change and small moments matter. Welcome, Chandri. We have Rini Boskar. Born and raised and educated in Britain, Rini grew up in London as a first-generation British citizen. She then moved to the US in late 90s. Trained in diplomacy and Asian studies, Rini switched her career to teaching. Rini is with Dallas Independent School District and is currently in curriculum and instructional leadership for history. Welcome, Rini.
Thank you.
And we have Rashmi Roy Mathur. Rashmi is passionate about social causes, particularly gender equality, refugee integration, and literacy. She is a director at Texas Instruments, where she actively promotes diversity initiatives. Welcome, Rashmi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you.
Great. So let's set the stage here. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which is also known as Hart-Celler Act, it opened up the US for immigration and on the basis of merit from all countries. Now this kind of goes back from 1920s to 1965, which had the national origins formula that got abolished by this act. Now, this act is a result of civil rights movement. So clearly the question becomes, the central theme here is that do the South Asians who immigrated in the US after 1965, do they owe it to civil rights movement that made it happen? So that's one of the key themes that we are dealing with. Now, let's look at the 1960s through 1980s. We see that mainstream media touted the success of Asian Americans. They're armed with growing number of statistical and anecdotal material, and this created the whole model minority paradigm. Now, in the last 20 years, things are a little different in the sense that a lot of the Indian Americans or Indian immigrants in America are either from privileged backgrounds or drawn from a class of Indians who benefited from India's education system, economic liberalization, and subsequent demand of Indian IT, particularly as what we know as year 2000, Y2K. Now, most of them are not fleeing any persecution or fleeing from any war zone. The point being, and let's not undermine the ones who are from that paradigm. It's a little different, but folks from India particularly, the point here is that large number of Indians have not had to struggle to achieve a comfortable life in America in a manner that some of the other immigrant communities have to, or particularly African American communities, they have to. Now, what we forget here is that for over a century, South Asians and African Americans have lived somewhat of an entangled life. And this is, there is an interesting article or a website, and I happen to have some communication with the creator of the website, Anirvan Chatterjee, and talking about Black and Desi's secret history. Black Bengali marriages, Vivekananda speaking out against anti-Black racism, Satyagraha in civil rights movement, Indian Muslims offering Black Muslims a global perspective, Dalit activists learning about Black power. So all those long history and friendships, the African American activists who first fought for our independence, all of that is a history. And what can we learn from there? What have we learned from there? And where does that help us moving forward? So let me invite Bedabrata first and give your perspective in terms of where do South Asians stand in this Black Lives Matter movement, and how do we identify ourselves in this whole picture? In the US, are we? And this question comes up often: Are we South Asians? Are we Indians? Are we the privileged class? Are we the discriminated ones? Model minority? We are browns with brains. We are honorary whites. We are victims of racism. I mean, what are you just confused? Do you know what identity we have? And given some of the works you have done, and given some of the things you have seen, give us your thoughts, please.
Hi, Raj. It's great to be here. A little early in the morning for me, but it's a very, very, very all-pervasive question. In fact, in some ways, I think this question should we even look at it as a South Asian way. That question comes up in my mind. And this question comes up because while South Asians, let's say Indians, who had come to this country from this merit-based thing that immigration that you talked about, there is also now a second generation, and I think what we find is that the ideas and views of first generation in general, it's also obviously it's a broad brush stroke. You cannot, it has to be a broad brush stroke. It's very different. Their consciousness, their approach, their attitudes are very different from the second generation, the youth of today. And I think one of the main things that we should separate out is what is and what should be. I think these are questions that often get mixed up, and as a result, we go in circles. So let's separate those things out. What is that even today, the South Asian community, if you will, I would call a very ghettoized community, self-ghettoized. They don't interact with the US mainstream in a way some other communities do. So I think that brings me to the point of what should be. So I think instead of us trying to figure out what we do as South Asians, I think a much bigger question would be, what do we do as human beings, as people who are living in this country, engaged with this country, engaged with the economy and the polity of the country? What do we do? So I think for me, that question is very, very important. Like, you know, when I have joined protest movements here, I did not join as a South Asian. I mean, of course, our color is something that makes us stand out. But I did not join there as that I'm an Indian and I'm doing some kind of a solidarity. I think the issue that George Floyd's thing has very openly brought up, and it has been brought up again and again and again, that it's a question of justice. No race issues can ever be sorted out if the underlying thing of justice is forgotten. So I think and I'm sure we will go into this in much bigger detail, and I think others will talk about it. But my very simple thing is that to say that there is one common South Asian response, especially across generations, especially across class, like very simply, like you know, when you talk to people, what I find is that large number of people who are very settled, who have, you know, care for their property, consider themselves to be highly educated and at high stations in life, are much more worried about the looting aspect of what we saw, while others are much more worried about the justice aspect. That, you know, that there is a man that we saw die. I mean, we have seen these images again and again in this horrific manner, in such a blatant disregard for human lives. You know, where we saw this police officer, I don't know if you noticed, for 8.5 minutes that he had his knee on this guy, on George Floyd's neck. His hand was in his pocket. The kind of callousness. I think when I see that kind of stuff, and that's happening in my society, it can happen to me tomorrow. I forget, at least I forget, whether I'm a South Asian or Indian or privileged or not privileged or what, and you just join the movement. And I think it would be much better for all of us to consider ourselves as part of this polity and just join in for that, because after all, who wants to live in a society filled with injustice?
Yeah, very well said. We'll come back to several one of these topics as you mentioned. Chandri, over to you. You have been in different countries from your early life. Give a sense of that to the audience, and tell us your thoughts, please.
Sure. I mean, thank you for having me. I'll answer what you said, but I think I'd like to segue from what Beda was talking about, because it's a neat segue. I completely agree that all of our responses right now are as human beings. But because of what you said, Raj, because I grew up in lots of different countries, and like a lot of our children who are Indian Americans, because I come from everywhere, I've never come from anywhere. And I have a bit of a outsider's view. I have a bystander point of view no matter where I am. And perhaps that's what informs my thoughts a little bit more. But while I completely agree with Bedul, I mean, nobody with a heart or nobody with eyes can disregard the horror of what has happened now. And this is just, I was barely surprised when it happened, because it's like Groundhog's Day. It keeps happening. People keep burning things down. We go right back to the status quo. So one thing that this particular movement the atrocity that happened, the two things that preceded this with Ahmed Barbary and Amy Cooper, the fact that this was, we were at a rolling boil with the deprivations of COVID and the fear that I think lit the powder keg that we're seeing explode right now. One new realization that is brought to me is Bedo, it's specifically my Asian point of view. Because I've grown up in different countries and because I completely agree with Bedo, we often see a certain, I hesitate to use the word ghetto because it has racial implications. I've been called out for using it before, but to me it is ghettoization. Because we stay very insular and many immigrant communities are very parochial, I think there is not that much assimilation, and there is a horrible dichotomy, and Beto spoke to this too, that Indian American, if we specifically talk about Indians, I know we're talking about South Asians, but I only know the Indian community. The Indian community doesn't have one identity. You have people who are highly educated, yuppie, aspirational, doing better than the average American white person, right? We typically live in liberal bubbles on whichever coast that we happen to occupy. We have higher degrees, we have good jobs, we are entitled. And then there's the other Indian immigrant community who own hotels and convenience stores, who are vilified and stereotyped by The Simpsons, and a lot of Americans who are not part of liberal bubbles. That is their only idea of Indians. So I completely agree. My voice is not the voice of every Indian in America. But the reason why I feel aware of my Asian voice at this particular juncture in decades of living in this country, of feeling assimilated, is that I've come to realize that, what did you call them, Raj? The smart browns and the almost whites.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And all of our peers, everybody in this conversation, let's be honest, most people tuning into this conversation are part of this exact same microcosm, right? So for us, I think we forget the fact that we're brown. Beto, you're right. I don't see skin color. I never have, because I've always been one of the few brown people wherever the hell I have been in. But I can't forget that I do have the skin color. And my schooling, I thought I was aware of these issues. I thought I was a little bit educated. I thought about race relations. I have been schooled just in the last week. I've gone the whole gamut from a friend of mine had posted a picture of those cops kneeling, and I'm a sucker for hope. I'm a sucker for silver linings. And I posted that and I said, oh my goodness, look at this. No, I didn't post it. I commented on a post saying, oh my goodness, this is just what a bunch of PR rubbish. This is eyewash. Doesn't mean anything. And that person, who happens to be Asian American, Chinese Asian American, said, oh no, it's time to have hope. While we're burning things down, we need to think about building things up. And I felt chastened. And then I in turn shared that post about how, oh look, maybe it is time to build bridges. Maybe it is time to put in our skepticism. Only to realize that some very close African American friends, I got to hear their point of view, that to them, in one fell swoop, I had crossed the line. I had crossed the picket line, because I had just dismissed, and her specific words were, you saw the kneeling, but you didn't see the batons in their hand, right? And it was sobering to me. And here I was thinking that I was sensitive to these issues. And it made me realize that because we are aspirational, we left the home country. Most of us went to a lot of trouble to get here. We came here to make things better. And I think there are two things that inform us in this movement that I personally feel I need to check. One is I need to check my privilege, the same way that white people check their privilege, because I may not realize it. And I fully think I do not have an implicit bias, because I'm just not conditioned that way. I don't think of, I came here in the 90s when, like my relatives who came over in the 80s, who had to go through the blockbuster movement in the tri-state area, they have reason to be conditioned towards racism against brown people. I didn't experience it. I came here for higher studies, whatever it is. But I realize now that I do have privilege, because it's only privilege that let me share that post, that let me think that there was hope and not see the structural injustices. So I think for Asian immigrants of our demographic, of our socioeconomic status, of our bubble, we need to really be aware that what our life is, what our viewpoint is not the same as everybody else's viewpoint. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that possibly the role that I feel me and my peers have to play is to bear witness in the same way that my white friends are bearing witness. Don't judge, don't condemn. This is not about nonviolence and what Gandhi did and what MLK did. This is about shutting up and trying to listen to their struggles. We have our own struggles, of course we have. Just like we don't want our struggles to be dismissed, we have no right to dismiss somebody else's struggles. But I think by dint of being immigrants from a country that has its own horrible ongoing racial atrocities and ostracizing going on, that doesn't give us license to say that we know somebody else's pain. We must bear witness and first understand it and not dismiss it. That's one thing that I think an Asian viewpoint is at this point in time. And I think that must deeply inform what we do, right? From expunging the implicit bias that we have, the kallu, the kalo, oh my gosh, I'm really open-minded. I don't care who my daughter marries, better not be a Black guy. That kind of deeply held thing to where we buy our houses. How many Indians will buy in Dorchester in the Boston area, which is a regentrified but traditionally African-American area. They won't, right? Those are the little, what is the opposite of microaggression, micro-ownership that we could do. And the second thing is that I feel as an Asian, I have an onus to fight very strongly is my own latent conditioning towards life being fatalistic. My experience from living in India for many years and being a Bengali is that maybe because of our religion, maybe because our country is so strapped, the homeland is so strapped for resources, there's this belief that the system is bigger than you, and there's no point. What can your little opinion, your little action, what can it possibly do? It's so big, it's so beyond us. And that kind of fatalism, and perhaps informed also by destiny, doesn't matter what you do, it's all written. It's foretold because of your previous birth or whatever your belief system says. And I think those deep beliefs, I think they paralyze people into inaction. What is the point? What is the point of doing this? Nothing's ever going to change. And I think that is something I feel I carry deep in my heart. It's learned behavior from my parents, from my grandparents, from seeing the world around me in India. And I think we need to make a conscious effort to shuck that off and say that just like America has given us a chance to make our fortunes, to get our education, we also have to give back something. It's not just a capitalist economy where we deserve everything we got, right? We have to give back and we can change things. And I think that's a mammoth, onerous task that I don't know is easy to solve. But that's pretty much what my current state of mind is. And I've been eating humble pie a lot, and I hope to keep eating humble pie and learning. And I think a lot of my peers are, and I hope more of my peers will.
Lots of questions that's probably just coming out of your voice here, Chandri. One thing you said, I noted down, is don't judge, don't condemn. This is one thing I'm probably hearing from both ends. Obviously, the voices are very loud on the side of the movement, but I'm also hearing some of the voices on the other end. And we have to, I feel we have to figure out a way to bring people along. And this is why South Asian sort of the identity question matters a bit, because as human beings we see the inequality or the racism. At the same token affects our posturing, positioning, and how how we behave quite a bit. And some of that probably folks are not going to talk in public forum. And that's some of the things that we have to be dealing with. So we'll come back to those questions, some of those questions at least as much as we can. Let's go to Rini, since you are from a quite different background. Give us your perspective on the subject as well as how you feel from your background.
Well, first of all, hello. And I have a barking dog in the background, so I apologize for that. He's a brown dog as well. I grew up, I would say, in a pretty affluent area. I was probably quite sheltered myself. My parents, my father had immigrated to London in 1956, so he was among one of the first Bengalis. He was also an activist in Britain. He built a community around him, and so we grew up. And the way we grew up is my parents tried to really made a conscious effort to teach us shared values, not to just raise us as Indians, but also to inherit all the goodness that Britain had to offer. But we did speak Bangla at home, and though my Bangla is pretty accented, but I can follow, and I'm quite fluent in the language. I still think as a British person, even though I've been living in America for 20 years. But there is a dichotomy between Blacks in Britain and the perception of Blacks in Britain with Blacks in America. And I think that originates from the history of slavery and enslavement. And of course, you know, there's the ideology of white supremacy, and I think we see that in India as well. But the way I believe, and this is just my individual opinion, is that the continuation of the institution of slavery in America just took a separate foothold here. So I think the history and the experience of African Americans is very different from that in Britain. In Britain, it's not a conformist society. So even among whether they're from West Indies, if they're Jamaican origin, or from an African nation, they can show that individualism. So they won't just say, "Oh, we're African." They will say, "Oh, I'm Nigerian," or "I'm from Congo." And there's a lot of prejudice and bias among those groups too, just like we have in our Indian community. I think the idea of model minority, that myth has it kind of homogeneizes our society, and it creates more tensions among those ethnic groups. And just as much as we need to be more vocal, and not just vocal, but active in the Black Lives Matters movement. I was just thinking on the other side, how much of African American communities will receive that? Is that just their fight? Or is it all of our fights? And it comes from Dr. Pine's point about looking at it more as a human perspective, like from a human viewpoint, rather than our own ethnic backgrounds. But I think we are so conditioned as humans, we do bring our own biases. And I came from London City, kind of raised, I would say, similar to being raised in Manhattan, New York. But being brought up in a very multicultural society, I think I also came to America with these rose-colored glasses. Then not only did I come to America, but I came to the Deep South, in Dallas, Texas. And So it was quite a big culture shock to see how even more segregated the American society is. And I was looking up the etymology of racism, and it was first published in the Oxford English Dictionary in 1902. And it coined a term, and I'll have to read it because I didn't memorize it, not from memory, but from a general, an American general. And he says that segregation kills progress of the segregated group, and it slows down their growth. And I think that's very relevant even today. It's because of segregation, it has slowed progress. And we won't see any change possibly in the next 10, 20 years time, but it is an evolving movement. And to just say, oh, well, what's the point of us doing something about it? Well, there is a point, because we may not see the outcome, but the outcome is very important and it will happen, but we all need to participate and involve ourselves in even as small as it is, but in any way possible. And that's one of the reasons I chose to teach in an urban school. I teach in North Oak Cliff, where, well, majority of our population is Hispanic, but the second largest population is African American. And, a lot of my friends have said, well, why don't you work in private school? Why don't you teach in your children's school? And they go to school in North Dallas. I said, no, intentionally, I wanted to work in that community because I think to eradicate biases, you have to start with education. And that's, within all classes and all races.
And it's a long process, probably.
Yes. And I think what we do is we go in the mindset thinking, oh, if we do something, we're going to see the result. What we want to see, what are the results? We may not. So we have to keep a very open view that this is a very long-term, drawn-out process. I mean, the very first civil rights movement was signed in 1865. So this is a conversation that shouldn't just happen when something appears in the news and becomes sensationalized and suddenly newsworthy. It should be an ongoing process.
You have to have conversation on how we keep it ongoing process when the media is gone. We'll come back to that. Rashmi, you have been involved in your workplace with some of the initiatives on the subject. Plus, you also have your kid who is now in the workforce is a good activist in the field. So give us your perspective from your side.
Yeah. So, like many of us, like a lot of us here and who all are watching, definitely I have come from the privileged family in India. And I went to a boarding school, a very elite boarding school in Calcutta, and, made my way here to study. I came here to study in the late 80s. And I must say, the reason this became a passion, the first thing that struck me was, I'm an electrical engineer by profession, is as part of my grad studies, I had gone for a conference. And in that conference, this was Society of Manufacturing Engineers. I remember it very clearly. And there was a session on women of color, engineers and women of color. And I had just been here for a year, and it struck me that's the first time I had thought myself to be, oh, I'm a woman of color, and that realization was very confusing to me, because I think till then I had not thought or looked at, the color of the skin is different. Okay, so and I had a grad student who was actually from Nigeria, who was one of my mentors, and he signed me up for that. And since then, I think that has been something that has stayed with me. And I am actually ashamed. Okay, I was here for Rodney King. I was here for each one of these, Michael Brown, all these incidents. And yes, it's outraged me. You know, I thought, oh, this is so, you know, the injustice of it all. But I hadn't done anything. I hadn't written to anyone. I've been a citizen. I do vote, but I didn't, you know, put pen to paper or donate to a cause or speak out or even educate myself. And I think the thing that has changed is having children who are learning the history, and they in turn are teaching us. And that has opened up, like Chandri said, you know, I've been reading. I just read, and, you know, and I was talking about reading, okay? Talking to strangers. The first chapter, that is amazing how, you know, how it moves you to think all these. I wish New York Times would publish all the names of the people who've been killed with police brutality. So I want to put it in perspective. Yes, there's a bigger, no one's born a racist. I don't think anyone's born a racist, but it is the whole system that is around us in every society that is creating these prejudices that are so hard that you grow up in a family, you maybe don't talk about it, or it's just somehow grows, right? And how can we get out of that? And I think it is like Rini, like all of us are saying, one is deep reflection, education, and first recognizing that there's a problem. Okay, because there is, right? We all know there is. And then together we, you know, that solidarity and taking action. So NTI, we have a lot of diversity initiatives. By the way, I've been working here in the US for about 30 years and in Texas Instruments for 24 years. And we have a diversity initiative. And there is a Black Employees Initiative. In fact, we just had one of our vice presidents do a video and his own personal story. Those, you just get, I don't know, I'm not very articulate, but I will tell you, they just move me to tears to hear these stories. And I've also had some what shall I say, experiences of, you know, being on the receiving end. So I think in totality, the whole education of this learning about anti-Blackness and getting over any prejudices that we have is so important in today's world. And by the way, I've lived in different countries, and just some time back, we were in Singapore for 5 years. And that's a different society, how they have managed, you know, with their, but they could do it only because it's a small country, of course. But in this country, I think it has to start grounds up, and of course, leadership, which that's a different story. But right now, I think grounds up, you know, talking to the police chiefs, taking action. It was really very powerful going on a protest walk and kneeling down for 8 minutes, 46 seconds. I mean, that, I don't know if nothing is overpowering that was for me. I think there is a definite call for action, and not just for South Asians, but the thing about South Asian is I think we have been very quiet. We have been bystanders, you know, that it doesn't affect us. And I think the time has come to just get out of that mode and speak up and take action.
You said something that I think Chandri echoed the same thing, the conditioning. I wrote it down as life being fatalistic. But let me bring some dosage of reality here also to the panel, because as much as we are choking with what we saw, and the media is having that, what I see in the media, the rhetorics are changing. In some of the media, like Fox News, as an example, I take them seriously, and the reason is that shows a side of America. Now, here is the question, and this is where I bring the discussion back to South Asians. I think this is the heart of the question, really. We are viewed as model minority. We have been painted as model minority narrative, let's say from 1960s. When we hear the slogans like "Go back to your country," that makes us boil. But once that goes away, we see, our rise in meritocracy. In workplace, we have Indian leaders in place at the helm of some of the large organization. So let's face it, let's hear it from folks who are not really speaking out here today in the panel, but folks we get to hear privately. And the concern is this: why can't we just conform to the established playbook, the playbook that is written to make sure that you conform and you get the reward? And if you don't, then you become an invisible identity. Why can't we just conform? And that is, it's a great thing to talk about Black Lives Matter and people talking about the brutality and taking a stand, but it's a completely different thing when you start to really realize what does that mean to take a stand and being faced with the hard choices. So why should someone put their career, that they work for their life, status of life at risk? And when this is not a clear and present danger, or at least that's what they feel in the immediate community. I'll give you an example. I'm hearing, okay, I lived in LA, and Bedu, you can give your personal experience there, but I lived in LA and I've been faced with not so good experiences from individual Black, and I understand this is a very cruel event that happened, but to me, all lives matter. And we all know what all lives matter means. We all know that's a dismissal of Black Lives Matter. That's how it started. How are you thinking of addressing this question, this very critical question that people may not bring on the forefront in a public forum, but it is a very important question for many. And how do we get people to understand? Go ahead.
Want me to take it up?
Yeah. So the model minority, again, the model minority myth, I'm appalled by that term. So, reading about it ignores so many fundamental things. It differentiates our communities, the Asian, and I'll take Asian as a broad sense, but if we want to talk specifically about the Indian community, it takes away all of our pressures and paradoxes of this notion that we're a perfect community and our children will go to Ivy League schools and, we are the tiger moms and our fathers are these effeminate, STEM, professionally skilled, hardworking people, and we emanate to be, and like you said, we conform to this ideology. But it also, the whole idea of model minority just reinforces that the fact is we're looked upon as foreigners. will always be foreigners. Because until we are seen as that we are part of this community, how are we supposed to assimilate if we're going to be looked at, if we're coined the term model minority? If anybody would like to.
I think you have kind of hit the what should I say? Thrown a stone at the beehive. So it brings up all these issues. I think the first question I want to take up is this: all lives matter. I mean, yes, of course, all lives matter. I mean, who the hell is going to say that all lives don't matter? But somebody the other day told me, and it's such a beautiful analogy, that in a row of houses, when one house is burning, you don't go and throw water on all of them.
Yeah.
You take care of the house that is burning. At that point, you don't demand that, we have to say all houses have to be taken care of. You don't. The issue why we say Black Lives Matter is because all lives matter.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Because we stand with everybody. What happened to those slogans of all for one and one for all? Okay, that's the basis on which we come. This is why I'm resisting saying in South Asian perspective.
Yeah.
I am saying that this is an issue where we have to say all for one, one for all. We stand second to none, and we are not going to see somebody else being put in that category either.
Right.
So I think the issue, these are very, very emotive issues, of course. So I'm sorry if I get a little passionate about these things, because the question comes to me that it's like this: that today those who say that, why should I participate in this? Or, to them I say, sure, it's your personal decision. If you don't want to participate, it's your decision. But don't ever think that arranging the deck on the Titanic, putting some chairs here and there on the deck of the Titanic, you're going to save the Titanic from sinking. And when the Titanic sinks, you're not going to be left out. So, to summarize where I'm going with it is that racism has to be looked from two very different angles. One is a subjective angle, one is an objective angle. The subjective angle is where we talked about that there is an issue of attitude, there is an issue of prejudice, there is an issue of privilege. There's privileges that we don't know. Like, for instance, ownership of public places. In general, whites have a general idea that we own the public places. I belong here. Who's to say that I should not be here? Ask a black, especially a black youth. They're afraid of public places because they can be just put away from there. You cross a stop sign just by an inch. A black guy is far more liable to be caught and thrown in jail, as happened to Sandra Bland from Texas, and she died in police custody,
right?
In the most mysterious circumstances. And that brings me to the objective part, which is that racism also exists as, and I think somebody else talked about it, I can't forget, I think Rashmi, you talked about it, or maybe Chandrai, as a very much institutional form.
System.
Yeah, the system. So that's why for me, it's a very black and white situation, but it's not a black versus white situation. It's a situation of us against the system. As long as the system economically and politically carries out injustice, and there is no accountability, there is no way, no amount of training, no amount of conversation is going to change the ingrained prejudices that we have.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, for me, rather than focus on people's prejudices, rather than focus on people's very deep senses of privileges, I want to focus on what can be done to change the system, what can be done to put the system on the back foot, what can be done to make officers, politicians, so on, more accountable. Like, I give you a very simple example. In the middle of this, while George Floyd thing is going on, people are out in protesting. A majority of Americans say that they are for the protest.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of it, the Democrats, I'm not even talking about Republicans, the Democrats authorized a bill that gives the Freedom Act, which gives more police powers to the president or to the system.
Yeah.
All right, I think this is where we begin. We begin from the fact that there is deeply ingrained systemic injustice enshrined by laws, enshrined by how executive, police, and so on behave, if we don't change those very objective things,
Right.
you're not going to change anybody's minds.
Yeah. But Bedu, to change the systemic oppression, we have to bring people along. And 3.5 million South Asians do count. The problem is we are not getting our voices count. Yes, many of us are going out there voting, but prejudices, implicit biases are there. And the fact is, I'll tell you this, that folks would not understand the difference between Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter today. And that is precisely how you defined it. I'm so glad that you gave that example. I'll take this example everywhere, because that's a very important thought. Let me say something from one of the listeners who is listening in, and Rashmi and Chandri, you respond after this. Rumela Ganguly said, "We as Indians cannot stay at the outer comfortable margin of the society behind gated communities and not look at the complete dehumanizing of the Black community. This mentality is because of our own survivalist conditioning that we have grown up in India. We are still in that mode." So that's a viewpoint. Chandri, let me go to you and then give your opinion on this.
Sure. You actually preempted me a little bit. I was going to say Bedu did a really good nutshell analysis of what needs to happen with societal change on the whole. That it was a great summary. But I would like to come back to the question that Raj was saying is I understand what you're saying. I hear you. But the question is, how do we get Asians to engage where they are not already engaging? Because you can't dismiss that everybody's the same way, right? And I was taking some notes, and I was thinking that we're all getting at this pretty much. That when Bedu talked about the ghettoization earlier, I think that's a very important role. When Arundhati said that in the end we're all foreigners, that's an important role. And Reshmi, when you picked up the thing by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks a lot about bias, human bias. And half the fight in this world, regardless of race struggle or any struggle, is to admit and own that we have implicit bias, not just about race, about any number of things, and then to be informed by it in everything that we do. I think if you connect all those dots together, I would say that not that there's a simple answer to the question, but to me, the starting point is own and know our biases. And I think all of us have mentioned that at some point, that this whole idea that American is a meritocracy in a way that our homelands were not, right? In India, just being smart doesn't necessarily mean you're going to succeed in life. Accident of birth is everything, right? It's where you are, what you have inherited, what money you have, what influence you have. So we are very conditioned to believe in meritocracies. In America, with its capitalist free market connotations to us, is you deserve everything you have earned. And therein is the breeding ground for the particular entitlement that I think plagues me. I won't speak for everybody else. It plagues me. I feel like I've worked extremely hard to get what I have. And at some point, I think that is what possibly leads to a level of disengagement, not feeling that we owe anything back. This is not my problem. It's the Black people's problem, right? Or Raj asked the question earlier, why should we engage in the Black life, in race struggles that are not our business? Why shouldn't we play by the playbook? And I don't know what those studies are, but aren't there studies that show that culturally, in Eastern cultures, we are molded to not stand out? And it's got something to do, I think I've read studies about wheat growing versus rice growing economies, that in certain, I don't know, Jared Diamond has probably written about it somewhere, that we are built to collaborate. Standing out is not necessarily a good thing in our cultures, right? Of course, we have exceptions, but in general, I feel like until we move away from this idea that this is a meritocracy, I have everything that I have because I deserve it, completely ignoring the accident of birth and everything that has happened before me to let me be where I am. Until those two things are not suspended, and until we don't assimilate more, and that's what Beto spoke when he first started speaking, the ghettoization. And assimilation is not as easy for everybody. There are language problems. There are many people who worked so hard to get here who fought English isn't even a first language for them. It is not easy. It's easy for those of us who have had elite educations and convent educated and whatever to assimilate. So there are struggles. But I think until we own and conquer our biases, until we move away from the idea that we deserve every damn thing that we have and we owe nothing to America, because in America you get everything when you work for it. And so if you haven't gotten something, you must have not worked for it, right? I think if we don't counter those, the engagement will never come. And after that, Beto pretty much laid out the map for what has to happen. I mean, that's in the news everywhere, right? None of that is news, but how do you get people to give a damn? And I don't know. I don't think it's a simple answer, but to me, this is what's really weighing on me, that engagement is key.
Yeah. I know Rashmi hasn't spoken, but can I respond to that just a little bit? I mean, everything that you guys are saying, I don't disagree with them at all. And as I said, there is a great work of changing our minds. Changing of mind, as historically we know, has played a huge role. But it's also very true that changing of minds doesn't happen in the abstract, doesn't happen in the vacuum. There is no better way of changing mind but in unity in struggle. It's when you start fighting for concrete things, like today, if there is a battle for, say, bringing police to accountability, defunding the police, whatever, we can go into specifics later, but that struggle and those who participate in that struggle and how after participating, when they go back to their community, will change the viewpoints, will have much bigger impact than by proselytizing, by asking people to look inside. That's the point I'm making. Like, I personally think that our second generation youth, who I see more and more involved in these struggles, and as much more, they're doing it not as South Asians, they're doing it as an American, and as an American who's bothered by injustice, who doesn't want this kind of stuff to happen, and are involved in the political struggle. Like, they are most of them are not under any illusion about the police. I think the police is doing a lot of optics to try to shore their credibility up, which is in tatters right now. But they're not bothered by that. So when they come back home and talk to their parents, when the youth begins to teach the old, you will see the mindset change in the old far, far greater than any amount of conversation, or, for lack of a better word, I'll call proselytizing, or looking at examining our bias will do. For me, objective is far more important than subjective.
I'm going to chime in to say I can't agree more about how in the last presidential elections, we saw that proselytizing has exactly the opposite effect of what you want. It makes people dig in more. So I totally agree with you. And I think what you're saying is what Rashmi said before, that going on that protest and kneeling for 8 minutes does more than 50 lectures that you may receive. But I'm saying that there's a huge slice of us who consider themselves, for lack of a better word, woke, right? Aware, enlightened, who are missing the point. And I am I'm not being judgmental. I am the first one, right? And this is me sharing my schooling, that I'm just saying that you're right, Beto. Action is key, but the action won't happen until we get past these inner obstacles. Because when Raj asked earlier that how do we get people to say that this is my problem, it's because to many Indians who don't fight their bias, when you say it's a black struggle, they think that they're getting exactly what came to them, because we have these ideas that if you work hard, you will get what you deserve. Those people don't work hard. They don't work hard. They're lazy. They steal. They're entitled. They're welfare kings and queens. Those kind of ideas, until it doesn't, yeah, those of us who have a young person, second generation to school us, will wake up. Legions will not. And unfortunately, a lot of the economic power right now lies in those hands. But over to
yeah, and before going to Rashmi, here's the thing, Chandri, and I think Rashmi said this before also. Second generation of the next generation is teaching us, and they're going to teach us, no doubt about it. If I tune in the news yesterday, I started to see the rhetoric right there that the younger generation in the mainstream, they are also trying to teach their parents. And guess what? There are specific narratives going on right now where how you essentially push back, from parents' perspective, or give them the toolkit from the parents, and not get those teachings from the second generation. So what I'm trying to say here is that expect that too, because that is going to happen. Rashmi, please.
Yeah, just a point here. Yeah, absolutely, Bedo, you're right. I also, I think the engineer in me wants to fix things, right? So I think systemically, what can we do, right? I want to, the simple things. Why wasn't that chokehold law changed? Why are bystanders allowed? A simple thing like my daughter told me, only 9 states the policemen have any kind of knowledge or training on ethnicity. Where in our company, in TI, everyone, mandatory, every year has to go through all kinds of ethics and how your conduct, code of conduct training, right? So here, I just wonder, so you, in 8 months, you become a policeman and you haven't been introduced to certain knowledge or certain that biases exist. You don't even have a conversation, right? Then how can we expect that to change? So I think that grassroots change needs to happen, can happen quickly. So while, yeah, we can talk till our faces turn blue, I really think we need to have those grassroots changes in every state, every district, every location. I think that to me it's a call for action, immediate call for action.
So external as well as internal. I see both ways there needs to have some work. Call to action perspective, and I think Bedo, you have started the conversation already. Defunding the police, that's been, or police reform, that's been, whichever end of the spectrum you want to take. Of course, if you can, like you said, rearrange the decks on the ship, save the Titanic, if that's what you want to do a little bit of police reform and hope things are going to be hunky-dory, great. That's probably good news for white supremacy. Now let's talk about this idea of defunding the police. What is that maybe a balance? And I know we are none of us are probably expert in the field, but as citizens, I'm sure all of us have some opinions about this. Who wants to start?
Could you repeat the question?
Well, we all know defunding police is a clear movement, but we know that things have already started in Minnesota, and it's starting to grow in different small cities. How do you feel about defunding the police from a safety standpoint, and is that gonna do more harm than good, or you think you can really get into the alternative to policing and vigilante?
All right. So I mean, if nobody else speaking up, I'll take it up. I think, as I said, my starting point is that it's a unity in struggle. Race, the question of race really boils down to the question of justice. And as justice is where we begin. Justice and accountability. This is I'm talking about in the political domain. So I don't know how many of you knew of this guy, David Sirota. David Sirota was he was one of the speechwriters of Bernie Sanders and a close advisor. So he has actually put out a bunch of things that we can do right now. And what the interesting thing is that exactly the thing that he demanded that we should do to bring more transparency, more justice, more systemic change. Systemic change also starts small. It's not that we will change the whole system in one go. It never happens. We start small and then we build it up. Exactly the prescriptions that he gave, what happened in reality is exactly the opposite. As I said, that right now in the middle of this Freedom Act was passed by the Democrats. Nancy Pelosi, although AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Ilhan Omar and Ro Khanna and a bunch of others, Premila Jayapal, I think also, opposed that act, but Democrats passed it. And his points were very simple things. We start that stop trying to give Trump more police power. Number one. Number two, do not pass a Pentagon bill that would fund military invasion of American cities. Let's start with that. We are in this country where bringing military on its own people is frowned upon, as we saw when Trump tried to do that, it was frowned upon. We come from a country, at least I come from a country in India, where military has been used on its people innumerable number of times. Okay, but we live in a country where that is a no-no, and let's keep it a no-no. Let's, along with defunding the police, let's launch investigations, for heaven's sake. Any police officer that wants to join with the protesters, they first should be asked to condemn police brutality in their own city. Let them first do that. Then we will talk about whether they will be allowed to kneel down with us or they would be allowed to work with us. Stop guns, putting guns in the hands of police. We have talked, all of us, I'm pretty sure, have taken part in anti-gun movement. But in this anti-gun movement, most of the time we forget to call out the most violent class, which is the police. So let's begin by saying, community policing without guns. Most of the times, police won't need guns. They use guns purely to show that they are who's the boss. Fire a few police chiefs. Take away the immunity. Take away the immunity that Obama had actually given during Ferguson. If you remember, during Ferguson, he had passed a law, signed on a law to give immunity to the police officers. Take away the immunity. That should be the first demand right away. I think, we can, I can go on and on about it, but I think there are very concrete demands around which we can put forth, we can start building movements. And in the process of building the movement, we will, since we are talking about South Asians will participate. I do not think personally knocking on door to door of South Asians, South Asian ghettos, if you will. I'm sorry, I know that's a bad word, but never mind. Would really help. I think you build a movement and ask people to join in. That's a much better way. And within that, then you start all the discussion of clearing your mind. You first of all, I think most Indians, okay, maybe not most Indians, a large number of Indians I come across have this inherent fear and prejudice about black men, that somehow black men are inherently violent. Where the hell did that come from? It came from the powers that be. One after another, we can show you how that narrative has been pushed by the power structure of America. So again, the question of clearing, so you cannot clear somebody's mind if the power structure is constantly putting out that narrative. So our battle willy-nilly becomes against the power structure for justice. I think if you put justice and accountability on the forefront, you will unite way more people than trying to ask them to be self-reflective. Self-reflection is very, very tough. Action is easier.
Yes, but getting people convinced to take part in the action, it's chicken and egg, man.
Yeah.
No. You see, this is the objectivity of life. Once that soup is stirred, you would see how people who you did not even ever think would side with you will come and side with you. Point is to put the soup on the fire, and then we'll see what all ingredients we throw in that. There's no point in buying ingredients.
But can I ask you, Bedo? I'm very confused by. I was just writing to our common friend who's the activist Tujo about I don't really understand the whole defund the police mandate. I don't understand how that's supposed to work. And my friend was telling me that you laid out a lot of that, and it's not completely dismantling the police, but it's dismantling the excess power, the rotten structures, the scaffolding around it. Yes. And so you pretty much fleshed it out, but I was curious, wasn't there an experiment like that? Was it Baltimore where they had cops on bikes without guns, a really bad area of crime? Was there some precedent for this?
There are definite precedents. There was this concept of community policing. Community policing that was tried, and that didn't quite work. And as I said, these things cannot work in isolation. These things cannot work in as suddenly a radical change. What I am saying. I mean, and I think there are a lot of viewpoints on this, and those viewpoints we need to all hear that. Right now, I think. Look, we can't do without police. In any civilized society today, any democratic society today, there is a question of law and order which police have to be there. But the question is, what kind of powers do we give to the police? What kind of immunity do we give to the police? There is a narrative that is thrown around that for our security, we have to give up our rights. And isn't this a narrative that's again and again thrown out? That Patriot Act, which is in my view the most unpatriotic act, exactly works on this premise that somehow we have to give powers in the hands of law and order so that we can be safe and secure. And I think we challenge that. We say that, yeah, sure, police needs a certain amount of power in order to police the thing, but on a day-to-day basis, police doesn't have to carry guns. We create within the police divisions, like there is a division that could be carrying guns under very specific circumstances. Most policing can be done without it. Secondly, even as soon as a person has done something, there is a complaint against a policeman, that should be taken seriously. Like this guy, Derek Chauvin. There were 18 cases. 18 cases. Had that been prosecuted, had that been taken seriously, situation would have been very different. So that's what I'm saying, that even this small change, let's not say a radical thing that every policeman has to lay down their arms. I'm not even asking for that.
But can I play devil's advocate on one thing? Course. This 18 charge thing has really been bugging me. That one of my pet peeves with all this armchair activism, because we're essentially armchair activists, is that we read statistics like that and we take it as a call to action. And I could be completely wrong here, but if you're a police officer and you've had a long career, isn't it likely you would have racked up some charges? Now, some of them he could have gotten off because of the lack of accountability, because of fraud in the system, because of enabling, ego, whatever. But I'm saying that when I'm so incensed by that 18 charges, that charge sheet, but I think we also have to remember to, I'm not siding with the cops, but just there's a bigger context. So when we pick our battles, when you go off the deep end, I think, yeah.
Fair enough. I think what you're saying is right. I don't want to belabor the point. The only point I want to make is the question of immunity. Like right now, the law exists that if as soon as a policeman says that I opened fire or I did this because my life was under threat, and he doesn't even have to prove it, he just has to state it, all things end there, which is why it has been so difficult to bring police to justice. Do you know that in 99% of the police killing cases, this is the statistic I'm giving you, 99% of the cases, police was not brought to justice.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, I will stop after saying this because I've been saying too much. I think we start from justice, and that's how we will build unity. And those who would come with us, we will. I don't want to proselytize. I want to build action.
And to that point, Bedu, I think I go back to what Chandri also said: chicken and egg problems. So somehow we have to have things moving parallelly, as in things are just not going to happen if we don't protest enough, right? But things are also the external item that we just talked about, defunding the police aspect. Let's touch on the internal side of the story, conversation or implicit biases. Candid conversation, and you go in fully expect that some folks are not going to change their viewpoint on that. But how can we have more effective conversation on anti-blackness and racism within our own community? And how do we get there? Who wants to start? Go ahead.
Too much talking.
Rashmi, you haven't spoken at all for quite a while. Either of you should take up. It's
so I don't know. Look, I'm a bit at a loss. In fact, I will mention something. I exchanged late at night last night with Raj. I said, I don't like this topic. The actual title, why, and it's South Asian, just like you, Bedo, said. I said, why not? And it should be a statement. So the concept of having conversations, nothing can be forced, right? So it's not. It's just being cognizant of what's happening and keeping this outrage and anger alive by our actions, by just. And I would hope that what we're doing today would generate a conversation, continue to promote that with our children, have these discussions. And like Bedu, you said, it's not all about conversations, the mindset has to change within, right? But more importantly is systemic changes that need to happen from ground up. And I really think that your last question, or one question you had posed, you had sent us, what can we do today? And I think that the power of writing to the police chief to take part in protest walks, I think those are the things that will that have to come out. And we have to, as good human beings, we just need to do that. And I don't know what else to say. I just think that's my comment.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a slow realization. I think people are, at least, among based on my observations, I think as South Asians, we feel we're more or less assimilated, but I think that's only at a surface level. We're assimilated in the way we dress, the way we speak, the jobs, the maybe sort of the leadership jobs that we have. And we definitely, like to a point that you had mentioned earlier, we don't want to jeopardize that because we have worked hard to get there. But also we feel like, well, we are quite assimilated. We have white friends. I speak to my neighbors. I don't see their color of their skin or anything like that. And a lot of our neighbors may not be all white, but they're of some European descent or Asian descent. And we talk to all of our coworkers. We are social beings. But I think it's really, when you're talking about internalizing, now we have to look at ourselves and say, how many of us really participate, not just in the economy of the nation, but real social issues? And that is when we will truly see ourselves as Americans. And I think our children will our children will play a big role in that. When they are asking, I mean, I know I get attacked by my 17 and my 13-year-old all the time because they're like, oh, yes, you're from a different country. And I'm from England. That's not different. That's not that different from America. But, they have their viewpoints. And I think we need to open our minds and kind of see what they perceive and not just hold on to our own perceptions. And once we're in touch with our own biases, and we come to terms with that. And I think acknowledgement is the first thing we have to do. And then actually think about how we're going to change those perceptions. And that's when we will be more assimilated and feel involved in these social causes.
So if I come back to now from the other side, I've been arguing for the objective, and now let's go to the subjective. We can ask, there are many venues for these kind of actions to happen. We, as you said, browns with brains, or whatever was the term you used. Let's start, essay writing competitions. That just essay writing as to, and involving all kinds of people. And we'll find a way of how that can be popularized or disseminated, of how Blacks have been affected in 20th century. We are we all belong to this intellectual class. We should be able to do this research. That how objectively Blacks have been demonized. How the system has called it blaming the victim. How Blacks have been blamed for their problems. Like Peter Moynihan, I remember he had said something like, oh, Blacks are a problem because they have only single families, single parent families. And that's where the problem comes in. Completely. So let's start those writings. That's one. Let's start a poetry competition. We all love poetry. Let's start writing plays of, maybe a play that has the situation of Muslims in India and Blacks in this country. We can do this. So these are all in the cultural field that one can do. It requires all of us to do somewhat, and there are a lot of people would be interested in doing this. So don't get me wrong, I'm now never saying that we should not do these things. But as soon as we take our focus away from justice and talk about our failings, our foibles, I think we've lost the battle. But nonetheless, talking about our, ways in which these ideas can be sprinkled, can be seeded in the community. As I think Rimi said, that it's a very long battle. It's a very slow boil. We can't expect things to change. So I think that's why I'm suggesting a two-pronged method. One is the action that's happening, and we supplement that with our own work in terms of in the literary field, in the creative arts field, in the entertainment field. Maybe kids can be asked to put a YouTube video on these things.
I'd like to actually support that by saying I think there's a coalescing of both the ideas, like what Biddle has been calling proselytizing, and the actual backfiring effect of that versus the value of actual action, which we talked about, the actual gut feeling that it gives you, how it pulls you into engagement. And I want to talk about this one study, one article in the Scientific American blog that I read years ago that I have it's seared in my brain. And it was about the value of descriptive values over prescriptive values. And I think, as far as I understood it, it's pretty much what Biddle was saying, that when you tell someone how they should feel, it almost never goes, it never lands. But if you show someone how you are feeling, it's we take cues from the community around us, and what we're calling conditioning. Conditioning isn't only something you learn in your mother's lap. It's all around you. It's your peers. And even when you're gray-haired like I am, you are picking up cues from your peers, whether you know it or not. So I think there's a marriage of both the things. I think instead of proselytizing, there's this wonderful young woman called Oromita, my friend's daughter, who actually started a change.org petition, which is a little bit like what Biddle was saying. She's trying to get support to include in the citizenship exam She's saying it should include a history of the Black struggle, of the Native American struggle, so that to be a member of this country, you know the history. You don't import I think that's what she called it she had a wonderful write-up where she said, we import our biases as well as our talent, right? So something like, you can proselytize without telling people what you must do. You could describe your values. And what she did was, she's become really vocal about calling out racism in the Desi community. And I loved it.
Yeah.
I mean, all our kids, of course, all the Indian American kids are by default that way, but she's taking them on. And it empowered me to say, I'm going to take it on. I'm going to take it on amongst myself and others. And yes, it runs the risk of proselytizing. But if you do that step in lockstep with, say, posting a picture of a protest you went to, or someplace that you donated, or how if you're a small business owner, your suppliers are Black businesses, so you're putting your money where your mouth is, more than just donations, then that's by example, which is what Beda's recommending, and saying that's the only thing that's really ever worked. But I'm saying even more than that, for those of us who don't have young people to slap us straight, it helps to see what other people are thinking. It helps to change it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to say something. A Black friend of mine told me, Rashmi, unless you felt it in your bones, you won't know it. It's the felt experience if you've not had it. So however much you try, you are removed. But the fact that you're walking the talk and doing something was more meaningful. So, this is in our Black Employee Initiative.
There's a nice quote from To Kill a Mockingbird, because you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, and until you climb inside of his skin and walk around in it. And I think we do need to realize that we are people of color as well. Yeah. And we have to draw on our experiences of our parents and grandparents who also faced police brutality, all kinds of brutality, but also went from when there was the partition. Those struggles are the same struggles, and we are still, maybe future generations will have forgotten those struggles. But that is the thing that we have to sort of internalize, and we have to, then we can say that whatever Black Lives Matter, whatever the term is, it's really that's where it starts. And Dr. Pine said that it doesn't matter, it starts with that issue, Black Lives Matter, but also all lives matter. And I think when we can walk in their skin and open our eyes and not just think, well, how is it affecting us, but be more altruistic, then I think then we will have, our community will be more involved.
Yeah. I want to go back to one of the questions, the defunding the police thing that you raised. I think one more element in this that we haven't touched upon at all and probably won't be able to is the question of class and race. These are very, very well connected. And I think one of the big issues that Black community faces, I mean, face it, even when the Social Security Act and the entire New Deal was formed in 1935, majority of those benefits did not go to the Blacks for a number of reasons. We can go into that. And even today, we just start with 1994 crime bill, which Joe Biden passed, Biden and Clinton, that disproportionately affected Blacks. And this education policy disproportionately affects Blacks. There was a statistic I heard the other day, that in Ferguson, where 67% of the population is African American, only 16% of that population voted. Why? Because Blacks feel that there is no change that's going to happen by voting. So I think today our proposals have to address these issues. Like when we talk about defund the police, what does it mean? It's not just defund the police, it's what we call divest invest. So you take money from the police, that has a punitive value that you guys have been not doing the right thing, so you're being penalized. And number two is that money should go into improving the lot of poor people. Like we know that welfare reform that was started by, from Reagan's times and then Clinton, Obama, and now Trump in a very big way, disproportionately affects poor people and within that black people. Because we know that blacks, for instance, earn on an average 1/3 as much as that of the whites. So I think the question of welfare reform today, of putting more money in the hands of poorer people, sections of the society, of bringing welfare to larger and larger numbers of people, healthcare, education. I mean, we know in COVID, more blacks have died than anybody else. So these changes will also go in a very big way of tying the objective and the subjective. Because I think the fight for justice, the fight for end of racial discrimination or racism in general is very, very tied up. I think it's very, very tied up with today's battle against what one may call neoliberalism, which is social sector cutbacks and leaving people vulnerable. Racism thrives on making others vulnerable. And our point of unity would be, we need to create a society where nobody's vulnerable. And I think, sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
I think I pretty much finished. Please go ahead.
I also think this may be a very simple view or a simple thought, but also when we talk about law and order and we talk about these systems, I think these systems also need to reflect, they need to mirror our society. So as I was leaving the UK, this was this was also an pandemic problem in Britain, and it came down to trust. Because when we look at, we call our community police in England the bobby, and when we're looking at these bobbies in our community, but we just see white faces. And what they did was, because we have in England we have a huge Indian population, there was a huge effort to employ Indian, South Asian, and African police officers, so to diversify the police sector. And so it almost like to try to bring trust, a mutual trust between the people and law and enforcement, to show that, okay, these systems also reflect our multicultural society. I think just from, not just defunding, but from a simple sort of changes to see more racially equal police officers in our communities, and we might be able to bring more trust. And probably more northeastern cities have tried to put in, not just, but I think it's wrong to try to just put black cops in black neighborhoods. That's not how you're going to build trust, because you're still going to have the same people with the same biases, but really to just mix it up, and hopefully that that would just take away some of that dishonesty or that mistrust that we have with the police and the police have with their people. I think they feel threatened both ways. I mean, that's one of the common reasons why we get these news is the police felt threatened. I don't know, how a police officer feels threatened by a civilian or a 17-year-old boy or an 11-year-old kid or a young youth, and then invariably did nothing on them, but they feel threatened, and that's their excuse. So it comes down to trust.
Yes. Actually, I'm hoping that over time we can bring police on some of these conversations. I think we need to hear from different angles to try to understand the problem. Some of the things that Beda said on divesting from police and investing in community. Many of you probably already know that in Dallas, actually, there is a 10-point action plan going on that specific subject right now. And if you need to know what those 10 points are, I can just shoot it to you. We have spent a perfectly good hour and more than 30 minutes, but I think we want to talk more. Unfortunately, I know all of you are also busy and tied up, but thank you for taking this opportunity. For the folks who are listening in, and I know some of you already mentioned to me, but I'll say this again. If your kid, the next generation, especially if they are really paying attention to this and taking action items, we know that things need to be a long and it's going to take time, and it's gonna come from internal, external point of view. But we like to hear and we like to hold public conversations as well as some of the more private conversations where we can feel that need, where some of the voices may be a little more safe, feel more safe, and we'll take that. But this is an extremely important subject for all of us in living in this country. I'll say this one last thing is that I know a lot of us are kind of talking about it, speaking about it, taking to the streets, and actually doing some of the things that that we should be doing. But also a lot of us are pondering, and not because you don't want to do anything, but you are looking to find out more, and that's okay. It's just that we'll encourage people, especially jara shate pache thaken na, to kind of give it a little shot.
I don't know if everybody got the reference to the shate pache thaken na.
I'm going to use that term many times from now on, but my request, please, shate pache thakun. I think it's important, and we need to recognize our implicit biases, and we have to work towards that. I'll quote one thing from Dr. King: "Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?" And we have to look at that question, and we have to think through that and say, are we doing something for justice or just us? Thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Really appreciate.
Thank you very much. It's a fantastic program.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you all. Thanks.
And nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Great meeting you
Bye.
all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yes, and how many years must one man